Hello guys, welcome back to the Lack Review podcast. I am back doing another episode in our fat loss phase series. So if you've been listening along to these episodes, that's awesome. If you've just stumbled across the podcast or you're listening to random episodes, this episode is about 3, if not 4 weeks into our fat loss phase series, and very intentionally structured and timed series to talk about things in a specific order if we're working towards a successful fat loss phase. So if that's you and you've got a fat loss goal and you've just stumbled across this episode, I definitely go back and listen to the last 3 to 4 weeks because this episode is very intentionally timed. And that's the first thing I want to say. If you are binging the pod, I know a lot of people discover podcasts and then they just go for it and listen to all the episodes really quickly, which is awesome. I love it. But this episode, we're going to talk about assessing progress towards our fat loss goal, assessing if what we're doing is actually getting us the result that we want, etc. So if you've just started your fat loss phase a couple of days ago, you can absolutely listen to this episode, but we don't want to actually make this assessment until we're 3, if not 4 weeks into a fat loss phase. Because like I always say, we actually need to have the consistency and the adherence towards something for a long enough time to be able to step back and assess if it's working. And I always compare this to like a financial budget or anything else we do in life where we put things in place to work towards a goal. We need to actually have it in place for long enough to then step back, do a bit of a bird's eye view and go, this is what I've been doing. Is it moving me towards my goal? So really think about the fact that if you've only been doing something for a couple of days, we can't really step back and do that. So I always advise to do this when we've got at least 3, like I said, if not, ideally, I think 4 weeks of really good consistency and adherence towards our nutrition and movement protocols. And we've been collecting data along the way of how our body's responding in terms of things like measurements, progress pictures, scale, weight, etc. We've spoken about this in recent weeks. So again, if you haven't listened to those episodes, definitely go back and do so. We touched on tracking progress a couple of weeks ago. And I said in that episode, we want to have intelligent forms of assessment in place and start tracking those. So when we get to the point of actually assessing those, we've got a lot of data to work with. So we put that in place a few weeks ago. Now we are getting to that point of assessing it, which is really cool. But again, you want to make sure, have I actually been doing it for long enough? Have I collected intelligent data to actually be able to assess it in an intelligent way? So if you've just started your fat loss phase, that's awesome. You can still listen to this episode, but don't actually apply it. Don't actually do it until you've got enough time under your belt that it makes sense to do it. And the same goes if you're someone who has come into your fat loss phase and decided to implement things slowly and gradually over time. I've spoken about this heaps, especially in the initial weeks. If you're not someone who responds well to going all in and really going hard at something, and you prefer to gradually implement new habits, especially if you're learning and you're quite a beginner and you feel like it suits you better to do things slowly over time, that's awesome. I'm all for that. We've spoken about that a fair bit. But then we want to bring that back to what I just said, where if you're gradually implementing little things over time, it doesn't really make sense to step back and go, how is everything working? Because I'm still actually in the stages of getting everything in place. Once we've got it in place and we've got that consistency and adherence, then we can start to assess how it's working. And the last little category to look at of people who maybe shouldn't be at the point of assessing yet is if we think about what we spoke about in the episode we did just before this one, the most recent episode, I spoke about the fact that sometimes we can have really good intentions of going into a fat loss phase and we've got fat loss goals, etc. But then we realize it's just not the right time for us to implement a fat loss phase for whatever reason. There can be a lot of reasons that this comes up. We spoke about all those in the last episode. So if you feel like that applies to you and you haven't listened to the most recent episode, I would definitely do so. But think about somebody who, like I said, had the intention of a fat loss phase, had the goal of a fat loss phase. If things have happened over the last few weeks where you just haven't been able to show up for that in the way that you wanted to, that's fine. Again, have a listen to that last episode, but then really clock the fact that's like, ooh, if I haven't really been implementing this very consistently, again, it doesn't make sense to actually then assess how is my body responding, how is it working for me, etc. Because I'm not actually really doing it. So if you can relate to any of those things, that's totally fine, but you just want to meet yourself where you're at and really think about the fact that right now we're going to look at assessing how what we've been doing is working for us. If you don't feel like you've really been doing it that consistently and that well, and you're still working on getting that in place, again, that's not a bad thing. That's a wrong thing. I actually spoke about that in the most recent episode where we can view that as a really positive thing, and that can be a really positive thing. So it's not bad. It's not wrong. We just want to make sure we understand that it doesn't make sense to start assessing how is my fat loss phase working if I'm still in the stages of actually setting up the fat loss phase and implementing the fat loss phase consistently enough. And this ties back to so many things we've spoken about over the last month, where often people can look at things and sort of say like, this intake didn't work for me, or my deficit isn't working, that diet isn't working for me, etc. But we always need to strip that back and go, are we actually hitting it? And that ties back into so many things we've spoken about over the last month, where it can be really common for people to have the belief or the story of like something, quote, isn't working for them. But we really strip that back and go, have you actually been doing it well enough to claim it isn't working? And we see the same thing here when we set up nutrition protocols, especially when we look at putting like a calorie target in place, which we spoke about in the very first few episodes. If we put an intake in place, let's say you calculate your effective deficit to be 1900 calories and you've got a fat loss goal. So you're sitting there thinking, yep, if my deficit calculates at 1900 and I want to work towards fat loss, I will start implementing a 1900 calorie a day diet. If we had the intention of doing that, but then we've either been A, like gradually easing in and learning how to implement that diet, or B, maybe implementing it sometimes, maybe not sticking to it other times, etc. Or like I said, maybe you've just discovered all of this stuff and you've been sticking to it for 3 days. If you fall into any of those categories, that's where we just want to look and go, we can't say 1900 calories isn't working for me if we haven't actually been hitting it. And then this starts to tie into so many things that we spoke about in the initial weeks as well, where we want to look at the question of like, are you actually hitting it? Because again, so often we can have the intention of hitting an intake. We've got the plan to hit the intake. Sometimes we're hitting the intake, but then if other times we're not, maybe because of snacking, maybe because of weekends, maybe because we're unorganized. If anything at all is occurring that is resulting in you not actually hitting your intake consistently, then we can't claim that that intake, quote, isn't working. And there's two little things I just want to really reiterate there. We've spoken about this before, but if we want to put an intake in place to work towards, to pursue fat loss, we want to actually plan our days to hit that intake. We do not want to be hoping to hit that intake. And this can be a really common thing where people are a bit unorganized and they don't really plan their days in advance, and then they sit down and kind of log their food or think about their food after the thought. And if we think about doing that, you are literally left in a position where you are hoping that it adds up to the intake that's required to move you towards your goal. And if we really piece all this together, if we've put that intake in place to move us towards our goal, again, it's like a budget. We want to actually set the plan in advance to make sure we hit it. We don't want to just eat willy-nilly, get to the end of the day and hope we hit it. So before we get to the point of actually assessing it, we want to look at all these things and make sure we're actually hitting it, we're planning in advance, and we're actually working towards that number. We've got the consistency, we've got the adherence, etc. And there's two little things to clock here. I think it's really common for people to, first of all, it's common for people to not be planning their days and hoping they hit them. So I'd like to think if you're this far in and you've been listening to everything, we're past that point. If you want to work towards something, we want to put the plans in place to actually work towards it. We don't want to just hope that we move towards it, right? So that wasn't even the two things. That was a bonus thing. But the two other things to look at here is once we've done that, it's then very common if we spend a lot of time planning to work towards something and planning on doing something, it can be common to confuse the planning with actually doing. Let me say that again. It can be common to confuse the planning with the actual doing and the actual actions. And what I mean there is, if we spend a lot of time planning our days to work towards an intake, if we use that example I said before, 1900 calories, maybe you sit there all weekend and you plan your days and you research foods and recipes, and then you go to the shops and you meal prep, you spend a lot of time on the plan. If you then actually stick to that plan for a couple of days, but then you move away from that plan for a few days, often in our mind, we can have this very strong belief of, I eat X amount, I do hit my intake, I do hit the 1900 calories or whatever your intake is, because we've spent so much time fixated on it and thinking about it and planning. But there's a very big difference between planning and doing. So it's really important to clock that, because it's one thing to plan something, it's a whole nother thing to actually carry out that plan consistently and well over time. So really just stop for a second and clock where that applies to you. It might not apply to you at all, but it might apply to you. And it's just important to have the awareness around that before we move into assessing how that intake is working. When we say all those initial things like, have you actually been hitting it? Often people can be like, yeah, I have. And then it's like, no, have you been planning to hit it versus have you actually been hitting it? And the other little thing I wanted to touch on there, again, I'm going to compare nutrition to money. I think that comparison just works so well. We can all understand it really well. If we had a budget in place and we stuck to that budget all week, but then we went out on the weekend and did a shopping spree every weekend, right? We couldn't then stand there and go, oh, this budget doesn't work for me. Because the budget itself could actually work really well to move us towards our goal, but then we're doing something pretty regularly outside of the budget that's making it all come undone. And then what can happen here when we bring this over to nutrition, this is somebody implementing an intake and sticking to a plan a fair bit of the time, most of the time, but then having things happen outside of that plan that makes us come undone. We can't blame the plan. We can't blame the intake. It's the things happening outside of that are wrecking it. And what we can see here with nutrition is somebody going, oh, I was on 1900 calories or 1700 calories, whatever it was, and that quote didn't work for me. But it's like, no, that would have worked for you if that was all you were doing. But then if you're doing a lot of other shit alongside that, that's the stuff that's not working for you. And then if we make one more little comparison of nutrition to money, this is where planning in advance and then actually following through on that plan is key, because we can't uneat things, just like we can't unspend. And what I mean here is, let's say we do have a financial goal that we want to work towards, but we don't really put a plan in place. We don't really follow that plan. And then we kind of get to the end of the day or the week or the month and we look back over our finances and we hope that they've moved in the direction that we want to go. If they haven't, we can't really go back through our week or our day or our month and unspend money, right? And the same thing happens with nutrition. If we go through a day or a week and we're just eating and not really planning, getting to the end of that and then looking back and hoping that it moves us towards our goal, if it hasn't, we can't go back through that week and go, oh, well, I'll uneat that and I'll uneat that and I'll change that. Right? Once we've done it, we've done it. So that's where we got to reverse engineer and go, okay, cool. Well, if I want it to definitely move me in a certain direction, I need to make sure I'm implementing the shit that's going to move me in that direction, because I can't get to the other side and undo it or change it. So I've got to move forward with a plan, carry out that plan. So when I get to the assessments, I've done everything in my power to move it in the direction that I want to go. And the last little thing to touch on with this particular topic is the reason I like to reiterate all of this stuff before we look at actually assessing how our protocols and everything are working for us is because often people can be doing a lot of the things we've just spoken about, be in a mindset of thinking this quote isn't working for me and thinking they need to adjust it. And when we look at adjusting this stuff, often we're looking at like, do we need to lower calories potentially? And we're going to speak about that in the very next episode. But if we think about a person in the position where they're doing a lot of the shit we've just spoken about, we're not really sticking to things, we're finding it hard to stick to things, maybe we're having big blowout weekends or extra snacks, or we've just got a lot of shit happening that's making us not consistently adhere to our nutrition intake, right? If you're in that position and then you start being like, this isn't working for me, I need to change it, AKA I need to lower it. We need to intercept that right away and go, if you can't stick to this one, why the hell would we lower it and make it even harder? And this isn't going to apply to everybody, but there's certain people that this is going to hit in the field at certain times. And that's why it's important to talk about, because again, often people can be carrying out a lot of these habits that we're just talking about, kind of half-assing things, kind of sticking to it, sometimes kind of not, etc. Then get to a point of going, this isn't working, I need to do something more dramatic, more intense, more restrictive. Again, look at that right there. If we implement something more restrictive, do you think you're really going to be able to do it? Because you can't even do the level that we're doing right now that's less restrictive. And that's literally why I've spent the last 15 minutes reiterating the same shit over and over and over, because I see people ignore all of that stuff I just spoke about and then go, I'm going to drop my calories, I'm going to implement a stricter diet, I'm going to go even harder. Again, clock that right there. Why go even harder when what you're doing right now is already proving to be too hard? And there's so many things we can look at there. I'm not going to get into them today because we spoke about a lot of them in the last episode and we've spoken about a lot of them over the last few weeks. Really navigating so many different aspects of nutrition, understanding all of this stuff so we can put the best protocols in place for us and our lifestyle and our goals and everything at the time. And this is where I think nutrition education and understanding is absolutely crucial, because How often do we see people implement diets that are, quote, even harder, even more restrictive when they're struggling to stick to the shit that they're already trying to do? And then, like I said, you're making it even harder when you can't even implement what you're currently doing. So before we look at assessing how our body is responding to our protocols and everything we've got in place right now, we just want to think about everything I've just spoke about. Assess, really, does any of that apply to me? Do I need to work on anything there before I move on to this next step? And you know if you do. If some of that stuff applied to you and you're like, oh yeah, caught out, I've got shit to work on here, that's awesome. Go for it. Like that's literally the first step, is acknowledging it. And then you can put the plans in place to work on that. If you heard all that and you thought, yep, okay, Rubes is on one today, but none of that applies to me, that's awesome. If you've actually had that adherence and consistency in everything that we've spoken about, and now you're in a position of going, I'm going to see how my body's responding to everything I've got in place. And the actual convo around assessing this stuff is quite small. It's quite easy because we did that episode a few weeks ago about tracking progress. So if you've listened to that, which I'd like to think you have if you're here now listening to this one, then we should have put multiple forms of assessment in place, like we spoke about in that episode. Progress pics, I think, are the most important thing, and then measurements, and then scale weight if we want to use it. So if you made your choice about what of those you want to put in place, like I said in there, I think it is crucial to have multiple forms of assessment, not just one. So again, I'd like to think you've got multiple forms of assessment in place. And then if you have actually carried out the consistency and the adherence to your protocols over a 3 to 4 week period while taking those multiple forms of assessment, now you're at a point where you can do that bird's eye view step back, like I said at the start of this episode, and say, this is what I've been doing, and I've collected really intelligent data along the way to assess how my body's responding, and now I'm going to do that. And really what we're looking at there is an overall trend in those things over time. And that right there is why we need to give it those 3, if not 4 weeks that I keep talking about, because we're looking at the trend over time. So we need to actually give it time. So if we step back and look over a 4-week period where we've taken measurements every week, we've taken progress pics every week, and you may have also taken scale weight consistently during that time, we want to be able to step back and look, is there a trend in those things? And like I always say, we're not looking at what did they do day to day, did they bounce back and forth day to day, etc. We're looking at that overall trend over time. So if we use measurements, for example, let's say somebody's belly button measurement was 80 centimeters when they first started their fat loss phase, and then they've had good consistency and adherence to their protocols over the last 4 weeks, and they've taken their belly button measurement every week alongside doing that. Maybe we've seen it drop to 89 at one point. Maybe it sat at 89 for a week, and then we saw it drop to like 87.5, and then we saw it drop to 87. If we look at the overall trend in that, it started at 90 and it has gradually trended down to now be at 87. So again, it is not about did it change every week? Did it change every day? Did it bounce back and forth? What did the fluctuations do? It is about what is the overall trend in this thing. And then we're looking at the exact same thing with scale weight. And I don't want to get too off topic with this, but this is where I like to advise women especially to do this over a 4-week period, because as a female, our body is moving through that 4-week cycle, give or take. But we know that the female body is doing different things at different times of the month. So again, we're never looking at like, what was it yesterday? What is it today? Even what was it last week and what is it this week? Because those weeks are very different as a female. Again, we step back and we look at a overall trend in 4 weeks. And it's a similar thing like I just said to the measurements. Maybe we started at 88 kilos and then we've gradually trended down into the 87s, maybe then down into the 86s, maybe bounce back up into the 87s, back into the 86s, maybe seen an odd 85, and then a little bounce back up into the low 86s again. But if we step back and look over 4 weeks, it's like, well, I started up in the 88s and my overall gradual trend is coming down because now I'm heading into the 86s, even seeing some 85s at some point. And it's not about exactly how much have I lost and exactly how much should I have lost. I never like to tell people what we should be aiming for with weight and measurements every week, because that's going to be so dependent on so many factors, and it doesn't matter. What we are looking for is the overall downwards trend in those things if we have a fat loss goal. And then like I always say, I think pics are the big dog. Like progress pics are the thing. They're the reason most people want to achieve fat loss, because they want to look different. So like I always say, the numbers are the middleman. The numbers are the form of the assessment. The pics are the actual goal. They're telling us if we are actually achieving the thing we want to be achieving. And that's why I think they should be the non-negotiable number one thing that we take. And again, you're not going to see them change day to day, and you might not even see them change week to week. But if you've got to pick from day 1 and now you've got to pick at day 28, let's say, if we can look at them and see some minor changes starting to occur, and then we can also put them next to measurements and we see that gradual downwards trend in that belly button measurement, for example, like I said, that's great feedback about, okay, cool, things are trending in the direction that I want to go. When we bring that back to the nutrition protocols and everything that you've had in place, if you've had good consistency and adherence to those, you can piece all this information together and go, okay, cool, when I do this, I get this result. And that ties back in with everything we've just said. We can't do that if we've had shit consistency and adherence. We can't do that if we're still learning and gradually easing into things. And all of this is fine, but we just want to understand it, because that is really the point that we want to get to, is being able to say, this is what I've done and this is the result that it got me. And coming back to the assessment, how we assess what is the result that it got me is what I just said. Collect intelligent data over time, step back, do a bird's eye view, and detect the overall trend in that data. If we have a fat loss goal, obviously we're wanting to see numbers gradually come down over time, and we're wanting to see that fat loss reflected in pictures. If we have weight gain goals, it's obviously just the total opposite. And again, we're just looking at that gradual trend over time. And the two little things I like to say here is, I think with progress pictures, we can be very hard on our own pictures. So I absolutely think it's worth having someone give you a second opinion. And that could be like, if you're in the Eat Like Ruby community Facebook group, chuck them in there and just get people's opinion. Or if you've got like a good mate or a partner or someone that's kind of in this journey with you, or they at least know what you're doing, I think it's just really beneficial to get a second opinion of someone you trust, because it's so easy to be hard on ourselves and think like, oh, they're not changing, or they're not changing enough, I haven't made much progress. And then when we just get like somebody from the outside to come in and have a look, usually they can see things that we don't see. And I think it's just cool to have like an honest person that you trust to do that. And the second little thing I want to say is, when we're looking at numbers and measurements and scale weight and things like that, we're not looking for big drops. I've spoken about that in previous episodes. So if you're still in that mentality of expecting big drops and getting excited for big drops in those things, listen back to those episodes and really remember that the bigger the drops, the less likely it is that it's coming from body fat. We can only lose so much body fat in a healthy way over time. So if we see big drops, it usually means it's coming from things like muscle mass, muscle glycogen, etc., which is what actually gives us shape and a nice physique, which is our actual goal. So piece all that together and definitely listen back to some of those episodes if you still don't understand that. But we want to understand that big drops aren't the thing we're looking for. We're looking for that gradual trend over time. And that's especially important if you're already quite tiny and you're working towards a small fat loss goal. If you don't have big weight to lose, you shouldn't be expecting to lose big weight, and you definitely shouldn't be excited or wanting to lose big weight, because that is going to be coming from things that are going to have a negative impact on your actual physique. And like I said, in the very next episode, we're going to look at potentially adjusting our protocols if we think we need to. If we do this assessment and we think, there isn't an overall trend happening, for the most part, it looks like things are maintaining and they're standing still. I'm going to talk about what we would do then in the next episode, but we really want to make this honest assessment of everything we've spoken about in this episode first, and even in the last one. And one tiny thing I'll touch on here, and I'll probably touch on it in the next episode, is if you make this assessment and you can see things are moving in the direction that you want to go, I am literally the biggest fan of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So if you've ticked all the boxes and now you've made your assessment and you're like, yeah, cool, I can see I'm chipping away at a successful fat loss phase. If fat loss is your goal, that's freaking awesome. It is not broke. Do not try and fix it. Literally keep doing what you're doing. It is moving you in the direction that you want to go. If you've ticked all the boxes and you've done the intelligent assessment and you think like, oh, maybe I am maintaining, maybe I do need to adjust, stay tuned for literally the very next episode. I'm going to just pick up where I left off from this one and talk about what I would do in that situation. And I'm also going to touch on what I would do, or what we want to think about if maybe things have moved too much. And that definitely won't apply to everybody, but there might be some people who would really benefit from hearing that. We can actually have, quote, too much progress. And I'm going to talk about what that means and what that looks like in the next episode. And really just make sure that regardless of what position you fall in, you understand how to adjust if needed to keep moving in the direction that you want to go. So stay tuned for the next episode. It will drop very soon. I will be back then. Thank you so much. The Eat Like Ruby podcast is not a substitute for professional medical or dietary advice. The advice given in this episode is general in nature and should not be used to treat any medical conditions, health conditions, illnesses, injuries, and/or any nutrition-related conditions, deficiencies, or similar. This podcast is not to be used as or in place of medical advice or dietary advice. Please consult your healthcare professional before implementing any of the advice, information, or protocols discussed in this episode.